Stay standing for just a moment. We're going to read from Isaiah chapter 6. I know that some of you are probably kind of weirded out, and I want you to get more weirded. October is going to be a month that we're going to remember in the 25th year of New Hope. God is doing a quaking, and we're going to see it happen over the next 4 Sundays as we just spend all 4 Sundays on Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1 to 13. And there's a quaking that happens when we see the words that are here. Let me read these words. I'm going to read them with some excitement and some wonder. You can read along if you want, just by watching them, or you can speak them with me. But again, I'm going to give some inflection to them. So in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood the seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called to another and said, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory." And the foundations of the thresholds shook at the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. And I said, "Woe is me, for I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips, for my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts." Then one of the seraphim flew to me, having in his hand a burning coal that he had taken with tongs from the altar. And he touched my mouth and said, "Behold, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for." And I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" And then I said, "Here I am. Send me." And he said, "Go and say to this people, keep on hearing, but do not understand. Keep on seeing, but do not perceive. Make the heart of this people dull and their eyes heavy, and blind their eyes, lest they see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their hearts and turn and be healed." And then I said, "How long, O Lord?" And he said, "Until cities lie waste, without inhabitant, and houses without people, and the land is a desolate waste. And the Lord removes people far away, and the forsaken places are many in the midst of the land. And though a tenth remain in it, it will be burned again, like a terebinth or an oak whose stump remains when it is felled. The holy seed is its stump." You can be seated. There's a shaking that happens in Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1 to 13. And that shaking continues to happen all the way up to our day. In September, we were talking about different ways that we breathe. You know, sometimes we get excited and we breathe. You know, when we sing, we've got to use some breath in that. Isaiah had his breath taken away when he's experiencing this, but also he was able to, breathe in just the wonders of this mystery, just the wonders of this being shaken in that. Now, before these kind of praise songs came along, again, I'm an old guy. I've been here for 25 years. I've been a pastor for 30 years. I didn't really grow up in the church when I was in elementary school, but then kind of in middle school, started confirmation classes, started going to a church when I was in high school. And so long before these kind of praise songs, they were just coming out, but my church wasn't going to do that kind of stuff. So they had the hymnal, had the organ. But every once in a while, there were some hymns that I really did enjoy as a young person. I call these hymns gusto hymns. Would you say that word? Gusto. Gusto. And one of those hymns was Holy, Holy, Holy. I mean, it was just one of those songs that you can kind of, holy, 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 and you kind of, or another one, I always remember this, when you come into the church that I grew up in, as a high schooler and that, they'd have the hymn numbers up on a board. How many of you guys remember hymn numbers up on a board? And whenever the hymn number 39 was up on the board, I was pumped, because that was praise to the Lord, the Almighty, the King of Kings. So I loved that. It was a gusto hymn. When I was in college, there was a new hymn that came up that was also a gusto hymn. It was Thy Strong Word. Thy Strong Word. Just like this old German beat march, kind of thing. And it could really get into that. Some of the other hymns, frankly, just like, and I would go to sleep. But I appreciated those hymns, and I appreciate the kind of songs that we get to do around here that bend me out of myself. I want to draw for you today something that oftentimes happens to us. This circle just represents our lives. We have a proclivity to be bent in on ourselves. a lot of bending in happens right here between our two ears. We bend in on ourselves. For instance, let me prove that to you. If you think, oh, no, I don't bend in on myself. You're bent in on yourself if you thought, man, what is going on here today? This is weird. This is uncomfortable. You were thinking about yourself. Another way to prove that we're all bent in, I'm bent in, you're bent in, is this thing that we call anger. Anybody familiar with anger? You don't raise your hand. But we know men, some of us as husbands, as dads, we know about anger. When our children were small and they weren't just doing something, sometimes we'd grab them and give them a little shake, or we'd force them because we're bigger and stronger than them. We were angry with them. Sometimes we were angry with our wives. We're bent in. We want it our way. Ladies, not to leave you out as mothers, as wives, there are times that the child spilt the milk again. And you get angry because it was going to inconvenience you. You've been angry at your husband once or twice. Again, not to let anybody out of this bent in stuff. Teenagers, oh my gosh, are they bent in? It's part of it. I mean, I was bent in as a teenager. I wanted it to be about me. Today, teenagers get a lot of help being bent in because they can bend and do this. And that's just a part of who they are. They're bent in, but I'm there too doing some of that. I'm bent in. So we're bent. Some of our children, our youngest children, gosh, they're bent in too, aren't they? So I've always appreciated some of the hymns, some of the songs, and as we look at Isaiah chapter 6, something every once in a while that would come into my life, and gosh, it just bends me out a little bit, because we're dealing with a God, and God is dealing with us because we have this bent-in proclivity. He wants to bend us out of ourselves, because God, how he could be drawn is he is never bent in. He is always reaching out. The most famous Bible passage that we know is John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave. He was out of himself. He was coming in towards bent-in people like us. Bent-in people back then, bent-in people today. We are bent in. Then one last proof of how we are all bent in, and especially those of us who are adults, just say one word: driving. Bunch of idiots out there in those other cars, but me, get out of my way. So, how can we become less bent in? Again, this whole bending in deal, it's all of us. The people who are here today, the people who are not here today. And I'm not talking about New Hope members. I'm just talking about people that are not here today. We live in a society of being bent in. We get a lot of help at being bent in. Today we have more and more personal entertainment, bent in. We live in our homes without front porches, with automatic garage doors, openers, bent in. But yet God is always in the process, no matter what culture, what time of age that we live in, he always is looking to bend us out so that he can do something in us. So how can we become less bent in? And the answer is an encounter with God. And it's what we see in Isaiah, this Isaiah 6 passage. Isaiah experienced a quaking and a bending out. Isaiah sees the Lord, and he sees the glory. Would you say that word with me? Glory. One more time. Glory. And so it starts to bend him out. Glory in the Hebrew means weight, means heft. There's something to the glory. Again, here at New Hope, if you've been here for a while, you know we do this Christ in us, the hope of glory, and so we kind of have fun with it. Every once in a while, I know some of you make fun of the pastor, Jeff, Christ in us, hope of glory, do this kind of thing. And so we've been playing with that, and there's a reason why we do that. But this glory in the Hebrew means weight. And I want us to in a way, stop playing with it. Still do Christ in us, the hope of glory, because it's a Bible passage from Colossians 1, verse 27. In fact, I always tell the whole glory story of how that started, this Christ in us, the hope of glory, when we do our connections class. I actually joined in with a bunch of pastors invited in to write a chapter in a book that's going to be released here. Hopefully, maybe by the end of this week, it's supposed to be shipped. That's what they tell me. So what I wrote for my chapter in the book is the glory story of New Hope that started back in the late 1900s. So this thing that we've played with, I want us to get a little more serious about and just realize that glory means weight. And when the weight of God falls on us, something quakes, something shifts. So when you drop a rock, if you drop a big rock, like all of us have probably done, into a body of water, the water gives way because the rock has more glory, more weight than the water. The rock, when you drop it into the water, it's a water quake. The water has to give way. Or if you were to drop a big rock, even on a body of water that's frozen over, as you know, it will be here in a few months. If that rock is big enough, it will start an ice quake. The glory of God is weightier than us. That's what Isaiah experiences when God comes down into his life. That's what you'll experience if God comes down into the reality of your life. It starts to change everything around. It starts to rearrange the furniture. That's what happens when Isaiah experiences this in Isaiah chapter 6. Everything is kind of rearranged. Everything begins to get re-engineered. All of his furniture gets moved around. Whether he wants it to be moved there or not, he gives way to the weight and to the glory of God. Isaiah experienced a God glory quake. When you say those three words, a God glory quake. And by the way, you can read it throughout the Bible. We're in every place in the Bible where God's presence comes down, a quake happens because of God's glory. God is more glorious than anything. So if you look in Exodus chapter 19, when God comes down onto the top of the mountain and Moses goes up, the description is that the mountain is quaking, that there's this thunder, that there's this lightning, that there's this stuff going on up there as Moses goes up to receive the Ten Commandments. When you get into the New Testament, on the day of Pentecost, after Jesus is risen, 10 days later, they're in Jerusalem, they're in an upper room, and they're waiting for the Spirit, and it says that there's a violent wind that comes and shakes the room that they're in, and there's tongues of fire, and they start speaking, and the church of God starts moving out. So wherever God's glory, wherever God's weight, wherever God's reality comes down, everything is shaken. Here's what I would like to get across this morning. The difference between God as a concept and God as a reality. For many of you here this morning, you believe in God and you have God as a concept in your life. For some here this morning, there's going to be a shift that will start to happen. Some of you, it's already happening. There's going to be a shift of experiencing God as a reality. There's going to be a quaking that God is doing something in you. So this is different from believing in God and actually having an experience of God, a quake of God. Again, when Isaiah walked into the temple, and that's where he is when we read Isaiah chapter 6. It's not the first time he's been into the temple. In fact, some of the Bible scholars and translators and commentators tell us that when Isaiah walked in, the last thing he expected on that day was to get quaked by God. When you walked in here today, for many of you, the last thing you expected was to get quaked by God, was to see a pastor up front just vibrating and shaking because he wants to sing these praises to this God. There is a quaking that's happened in me. I'm praying that this quaking will happen to you. So Isaiah did not walk into the temple that day and say, oh, there really is a God. He already believed. But God went from being just a concept in Isaiah's life to becoming a weighty reality. So what's the difference between God as a concept and God as a reality? It's a matter of who quakes who, of who moves who. Again, it's all a matter of glory. God as a concept is lighter than you. When you bring God as a concept into your life, you shape it. It fits around your existing patterns. It does not move you around. It does not quake you. If you believe in God and it just hasn't changed you very much, God is just a concept. So if you have God as just a concept, and if we were to say that this whole board is God, we can move it around. We move it how we want it to move. We believe in it how we want it to believe. We get comfortable with how we get uncomfortable with it. When God comes into your life, he's the one that starts moving you around. You will get uncomfortable. Isaiah is uncomfortable. But he also knows that he needs to be uncomfortable to experience this God reality in his life. Again, sometimes we believe in God just as a concept because someday we believe that there is a heaven and there is a hell. God as a concept, it promises us that someday we'll get heaven and not hell. We all want that because we're bent in. Again, you don't have to be real brilliant to realize, do you want to go to a place where there's eternal suffering, or do you want to go to a place where there's eternal glory? Because I'm bent in, I want to go to a place, but God is just a concept with that. Something more is happening here. Again, God was just a concept. He can't come in and start rearranging our beliefs. He can't come in and start rearranging our priorities. He can't come in and start making us read the Bible in a way that we just don't read it with bent in, or we don't read it at all. God, when he comes more than a concept, starts to bend us out of ourselves. 80% of Americans, when they're surveyed, answer the survey in saying that, I believe that I can have a good relationship with God without his church. So 80% of Americans are saying, I believe that there is a God, but I can move him how I want to. And so again, this whole idea of us all being bent in, gosh, do we come by it honestly? So there's a lot of people that say that they believe in Jesus, but spend their lives bent in, spend their lives going to church when it's convenient, not going to church when they don't want to. And there's a lot of people out there that have just completely left the church because they're so bent in. And again, I know that there's bad churches out there. I know that there's amazing churches out there. But I know that somehow there's got to be a bending out to move God from being a concept in our lives to being a reality in our lives. So, what this means is that God and God's church, if God is just a concept, it's lighter than you. So you can move it, but it can't move you. If you have God as a concept, you don't have a God who can actually change you and move you and make you uncomfortable and make you different from some of the 80% that are just spending their time bent in. Because it's weird when people start bending out. When the weight of God's glory comes down, what happens? When the weight of God's glory comes down, there is a move that takes place. Isaiah, as we're seeing today and as we're going to see over the next 3 Sundays, is quaked in hard ways, in God ways. Maybe you caught it as we were reading through it today. But God gives a calling to Isaiah's life that is very, very difficult. Go out and speak. Here is who God is. And people will not listen. People will not be changed. People will not be moved. How long? Just keep doing it. Just keep doing it. Isaiah is quaked in hard ways, but he's quaked in God ways. And isn't it amazing that if Isaiah is written 700 years before the time of Jesus, and we're reading this book of Isaiah 2,700 years later, wouldn't it go to prove that Isaiah was truly quaked? Not just in Isaiah chapter 6, but throughout the book of Isaiah. We sang a song this morning, and we referenced it with communion, that whole idea that our sins are as scarlet, but as white as snow. That's from Isaiah chapter 1. When we get closer to Christmas over the next couple of months, we'll talk about the prophecy in Isaiah that a virgin shall bear a son. We'll talk about the prophecy that we're going to call him the Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father. We know that it was the book of Isaiah that inspired Handel's Messiah and all the bending out that Handel's Messiah brings into us. It's all from when we get to the season of Lent and Easter, we'll read Isaiah chapter 53 that talks about this suffering servant who is bruised for our iniquities, and by his stripes are we healed. Isaiah is often called the gospel of the Old Testament because there's all these prophecies of Jesus, because Isaiah gets quaked again and again and again and again. So Isaiah, as we see, he realizes and proclaims that God is a Quaker. I mean, I think some of you probably thought God is Lutheran or God is non-denominational, but God is a Quaker. The last thing for us this morning is that following Jesus and quaking goes together. Here's one story from Luke chapter 5. On one occasion, while the crowd was pressing in on Jesus to hear the word of God, he was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, and he saw two boats by the lake. But the fishermen had gone out of them and were washing their nets. Getting into one of the boats, which was Simon's, Jesus asked him to put out a little from the land, and Jesus sat down and taught the people from the boat. And when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch." And Simon answered, and again, catch this, he calls him master, a term of respect. He realized that somehow Jesus, who's been borrowing his boat for the last couple of hours and speaking because there's this press of people wanting somehow to know and be quaked by this God, but not knowing how it is, because all those people back then were just as bent in as we are. But when the presence of Jesus comes, they realize that something's happening. And Peter is bent in. We see him being bent in over and over throughout the Gospels. It's one of the wonders and glories about the Gospels is that there is no religious, goofy stuff that goes on. The disciples are bent in as all of us. And so Peter is bent in, and he realizes that Jesus, he might be this good teacher. He's held rapt attention of these people, and he said some things that just you got to keep working through. But he realizes that Jesus isn't a fisherman. And Peter, he could have been a 4th, 5th, 6th generation fisherman. You don't go out and fish during the heat of the day, because in the heat of the day, the fish go down into the deeper, cooler water. But you go out at night. So Peter is, okay, Master, I don't want to do this. Because, my fishing buddies, when I get back in, gosh, are they going to razz me for the next 20 years? Master, we toiled all night and took nothing. Okay, but at your word, I'll let down the nets. And when they had done this, they enclosed a large number of fish, and their nets began breaking. They signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them, and they came and filled both the boats so that both began to sink. But when Simon Peter saw it, he fell at Jesus' knees, saying, "Depart from me, for I'm a sinful man, O Lord." He just got moved from a concept to a reality. And he fell. For he and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of the fish that they had taken. And so were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid." Again, whenever the presence of God comes down, oftentimes the very first words, because you're shaking, is, "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching men." And when they had brought their boats to land, they left everything and followed him. And again, Peter over and over again, even in following Jesus, with this story and with many of the other stories, he's going to be bent in. And over, Jesus is going to bend him out, until he dies upside down on a cross, because he was bent out to bring the gospel to other people and to other nations. I want to leave you this morning with some questions, some quake challenges for you to consider this week, as maybe you'll read Isaiah chapter 6. Have you experienced a God glory quake in your life? If you have, it's going to change your attitude about attending church, about reading the Bible, about serving, and about giving. God as a concept doesn't do that. What changes in beliefs, practices, and attitudes give evidence that God is a reality in your life. Not that you're just one of the 80% of all Americans who believe that Jesus is a really good person. And how is God quaking you? How is he quaking you this morning? Again, maybe like Isaiah, one of the last things that you thought would happen is that you would get quaked coming into one of God's churches this morning. Quaking is going to happen in New Hope. This is not going to be a safe church over the next number of Sundays. Quaking is going to happen. And I'm praying that it will be a God quake that's going to make a difference in many of our lives for the next 25 years. Let's stand and pray. God, over all the centuries, you have come into the lives of men, the lives of women, the lives of teenagers, and even in the lives of children. And you have given them glory quakes. Sometimes, Jesus, you know that throughout the lives of us who are here today, we believe in you, and we've sometimes played around with this thing called religion in the church. But this is a new day. This is an old word from you, but yet your old words can become new. So I'm praying for a quaking to happen in the lives of the men, women, teens, and children here at New Hope. I'm praying that they will build upon what has already happened, but I'm praying for new quakes. I'm praying, Jesus, that you will do something that needs to be done here among us and in us and through us and all around us and way beyond us. So Jesus, quake us. You are in the business of quaking still today. And you're quaking on this October 6, 2013. Make us followers of you, Jesus, as Isaiah was. We ask it in your name. Amen. And maybe with a new reality this morning, there is something happening here more than just a Christ in me, the hope of glory. Maybe. So let's go out with the shout. Christ in us, the hope of glory. Let's sing one more song and see what God does.